Okay, let's talk about constructing hypotheses. Hypothesis, once we have a research purpose and we use the process of operationalization, we can operationalize the concept through indicators to variables, right? So when we have a set of indicators, then we can look at the indicators, try to create a set of research questions or research hypotheses. Why do we need to have a hypothesis or research questions? Why? Well, very simple. Because they can be used for us to collect data, to provide a general directions for us to collect data. Okay? So basically, it's very important. Data collection is a must for research. It's not only enough, it's far away from sufficient to lay out the research questions. Research problem. Research problems itself cannot be used to collect data. So let's look at the example we have used, the impact of alcoholism on the family, right? So look at here. If this is a research problem in general, it would be very difficult for us to collect data by just looking or just ask you, okay, what kind of impact of alcoholism on your family? That would be too broad, right? Because the impact of alcoholism on the family themselves are the so-called concept. Concept cannot be used to collect data. So that's why we need to review literature. Try to identify a set of indicators out there. So the impact of alcoholism on the family, we can try to find out after literature review, of course. We can have 3 indicators on the marital status, on family finance, and on the children's way of life. So that these 3 indicators can help us to lay out 3 sets of research questions of the research hypotheses. To lay out research questions is much easier. It's easier than lay out the hypothesis. Because when we talk about hypothesis, we need to understand quite a few concepts. Then let's talk about what is the meaning of hypothesis and how to construct a hypothesis. Okay, so here is the lesson goals for this week. We are going to understand the definition, functions, and the characteristics of a hypothesis. And we are going to learn the different types of hypotheses. And also we will learn the errors in testing a hypothesis. Okay, so this is general goal we are going to take. And some students approach me to say, okay, why is my note-taking got 0 since I have rate yours, right? You get 0 because you did not take note on your book. You need to take notes. If you keep your notebook empty, clean as possible, every time the TAs look over your book, you will still get 0. Okay? So if you have you will continue to ask me why I check your portfolio. Well, I check your portfolio because I want to understand what is the general direction of your graduate's paper. Okay? So that part of the score mostly rely on TA's check on the completeness or on the devotion of your effort on taking the notes. So please take notes, okay? If you did not do that, you will still get 0 on that. Okay? Some students did this quite well because you just follow the 9 of the lecture, you will have a lot of notes, I believe. If you sit there and play along your cell phone or just sit idle to enjoy my presentation, then you will have no note-taking at all. So please, so you have to keep in mind the score on that part is all your note, mostly rely on your note-taking. Okay, this one, hypothesis. Hypotheses, basically, they are formed after literature review. You see some scenario, right? You see some scenario, and you really want to do some data collection. So this is some kind of in-between stuff. You have to be very careful about the construction of the hypothesis. And you are going to use the hypothesis to collect data to test this hypothesis. So this is the starting point for your data collection, okay, basically. So what is the real definition for this one? Okay, this is the definition. It is a, whoops, it's a typo here. It is a tentative, reasonable. It is a tentative, reasonable explanation of some phenomena already happened or bound to happen. And remember, the key words here is tentative and reasonable. Very important to keep in mind. Tentative means for now. And reasonable must be based on your experiences, your knowledge on this issue. So it is one of the explanation. It is explanation, right? Explanation for what? You see something, or you perceive something is going to happen. So basically, whenever we see something, or whenever we encounter some phenomena, we will give it an explanation, right? And this explanation, if it is tentative and reasonable, then we call it as a hypothesis, 假设, hypothesis. So these two words are very, very important, tentative, reasonable. So, for example, this morning, you step out your dormitory, or you step out onto the street, and you saw a small pot or small pad of water just in front of you, right? It's very small, okay? So you see this phenomenon. This is some phenomena already happened, right? So you see this one. What is your explanation about this? Well, a tentative, reasonable explanation maybe is something like this. Oh, it's a dog. It is a dog peed on the street, right? Very, very likely. So this explanation is tentative, is bound to be tested. It is reasonable because your experience saying that, oh, this is a small size part of there, right? Not big, very small. So you can try to test it. So how are you going to test it? Well, some will do this, use his fingers and scrape some of the liquid out there and smell. No smell at all. Maybe you will test it. No smell, no test at all. So your hypothesis is falsified, right? Because you just give it an explanation, tentative, reasonable explanation, indicating that you say this explanation, this part of water is dog pee. But after you collect data, you test it, you say, oh no, wow, you have to overthrow, you have to reject the hypothesis, right? So now you are going to give it another explanation because you have to revise it. You know now for sure, this is not a dog pee. So what is that? What is that? So you continue to give it another set of reasonable, tentative, reasonable explanation, right? So remember, when we say hypothesis, it's something need to be tested. So that's why we say tentative for now, okay? So this is hypothesis, and move down. So be careful for this one. Before we endeavor into the understanding of a hypothesis, we have to make sure not essential for a study. Because on the other side of the research hypothesis, we can have research questions. Research questions are mostly used for qualitative research, and hypotheses are used for quantitative research. So they are a little bit different. So let's look at the definitions or characteristics of a hypothesis. Basically, it is a tentative proposition. It is a tentative proposal to you. Okay, for now, temporary. And its validity is unknown because it is a tentative, reasonable explanation based on my own judgment, right? So whether it is valid, I have no idea yet. So I have to test it. Okay, so the validity is unknown. And in most cases, it specifies a relationship between two or more variables. Most cases. Of course, there are some few cases not quite so. For example, this is the P dot P. It's very simple, right? So this is not one of the most cases. But most cases, for example, the time you take to study, the more time you take to study, the higher scores you will get in this research methodology course. Well, if this is a hypothesis, yes, because I indicated the relationship, a positive relationship between two variables. One, the time of your study. Two, the scores of your score for this class. So basically, there are positive correlations, right? Positive relation between these two, most cases, okay? And so functions of a hypothesis, what is good for function? Because it brings clarity to a research problem. Let me give you some idea. Look here. Let's use the one example we have used constantly. The impact of alcoholism on family. Is that right? Okay, so this research question, we try to understand what kind of impacts of alcoholism on family, right? So this is the concept. Still remember that? This is the concept. So we use indicators. We based on literature review. Remember that, based on literature review. We know most scholars, when they try to identify the impact of alcoholism on family, they focus on three major issues. One is marital status. The other one is family finance. The third one is children's way of life, right? Three. So look here. In this regard, we have three indicators. So now we can set up three hypotheses. For example, there is a negative relationship between the assumption of alcoholics, and the marital status. Is that right? First one. The second hypothesis, there is a negative relationship between the use of alcoholic and family finance. The third one, there is a negative relationship between the use of alcoholics and the children's ways of life. Can we do this? Yes. So in this regard, it brings the clarity for us to collect data to deal with the research problem. Because now we could focus on the three research hypotheses, but not the research problems. Because the research problem is too broad, too huge, bold, right? So we narrow down our focus to the three hypotheses. Good. So basically we formulate our research hypothesis. It's a kind of hunch or assumption based on literature review. Then we go to collect our required data. Try to answer, we have three, for example, coming out from here. We have three hypotheses, right? So we collect data to answer the hypothesis. Then we analyze the data to draw conclusion about the hypothesis. The hunch here is a hypothesis, okay? And we can analyze it. And once we have the answers for the three hypotheses, then we can go back to answer the meaning of the research problem, right? So basically it can help us to narrow down our focus, to clarify what kind of data we need to collect. It's helpful. So without research hypotheses or research questions, it would be very difficult for us to focus on our effort to collect data. Very difficult. Okay? So this is a very important function for research hypothesis. Okay? Any question? I give you 3 minutes to think of this by yourself. Okay? So the idea here is very simple. When we have a research problem, just like the impact of alcoholism on the family, right? Basically, we cannot just go directly to collect data to answer this research problem. We need some mechanics out there. We need some useful guidance out there. And these guidance are based on our literature. We create a set of indicators, right? So we use each of the indicators to lay out, to write up the hypothesis or research questions for us, so that we can count down the research hypothesis to collect data. So we can analyze the data to test the hypothesis. If we lay out the research questions, we can collect the data to answer the research questions. Is that right? So it's kind of, you can treat it as a mechanic, some tool for us to use. Or otherwise, it will be very difficult for us to, that it's quite obvious. We cannot just go ask people, hey, what is the impact of alcoholism on your family? Is that right? It's very difficult. However, if we focus on the impact on the marital status or your family, we can say something that is more concrete. And we talk about, I ask you about what happened to your family finance. Is getting, losing a lot of money or suffer a lot of financial damage and so on. Well, that's helpful, right? And what happened to your kids? Well, look at here. Years ago, your kids wore nice clothing, but now look at that, dirty, without taking baths for a few days. Well, right? So you can narrow down the focus. That is helpful. So remember, it's quite logical in a sense. When we talk about doing research, we always focus on 3 issues. Really, no more, no less. One is the identifying the research problem. This is something we want to do. And inside the research problem, we have a study issue and study population, right? Very simple. And then after that, we go to collect data. So our efforts here are helping us, will be helping us to collect data. After we have data, then we have to analyze the data. Is that right? Analyze the data. So analyze the data so we can use the data and the result of the data analysis, try to answer our research question, and then we answer our research problem. So look here, it's quite logical. There's no mystery there. It's just very simple, straightforward logic, reasoning. That's it. Okay? And continue. So let's say characteristic of a hypothesis. There are some issues here. The first one, we look at the definition of the hypothesis. It is a tentative, reasonable explanation of some phenomenon already happened or bound to happen, right? Very simple. This is a very simple. So based on this understanding, so we need to put some efforts to have some characteristic of such hypothesis. First one, it should be simple, specific, and clear. Simple, specific, and conceptually clear. What does that mean? It means whenever you see one hypothesis, it should be very simple, simple in its writing, specific in its meaning, conceptually clear in its definition. There's no misunderstanding. Whenever you see it, you know what does that mean. Whenever you see a hypothesis, you know what it means. For example, there is a positive relationship between the time of your study and the score you get. Clear? Simple? Specific, related to time and the score, right? And conceptually clear. I don't think there is any misunderstanding about the time of studying. Any misunderstanding about the score of your in this class, right? So you can see that it is clear, must be clear over there. So let's see. Some are easy to test. For example, the average age of the male student in this class is higher than that of the female students. Great, right? Very simple. We are talking about the average age of male student and female students. And I provide my tentative, reasonable explanation is that male students are older than female students in average. Well, simple, right? So this one is clear, specific, and easy to test. Some others, they are clear and specific too, but maybe a lot more difficult to test. Let's look at this one. Suicide rates vary inversely with social cohesion. This one is a little bit difficult, right? Let's take a look at this hypothesis. We have two variables, two things, this one and this one, right? And this indicates a negative relationship. Negatively. That means that the more the suicide rates, the less the social cohesion. You can inversely means negative, right? Okay? So here, suicide rates, it is a concept, but it is easier to measure. You can measure it in terms of, say, annual rate, monthly rate. Okay? Fine. You name it. That will be fine. But how about social cohesion? This is another concept, right? So when you say social cohesion, wow, it's a little bit difficult because you need to understand what constitute the major indicators of social cohesions. So you have to review literature, try to identify a set of indicators or something that you can measure, right? So this one is a little bit difficult. However, can it be tested? Of course, it can. Right? It can, but needs some efforts. So here, the key words here, it can be tested, but a lot more difficult. That's it. However, these two hypotheses share the same characteristics. That is, they are both simple, clear, specific, right? But the only difference is that the first one is easy to test. The second one is a little bit difficult to test, but both are testable. So they are good hypotheses, right? And also, so this kind of characteristic capable of being tested is about verification. Should be capable of verification. That is, we need to have methods. We need to have the techniques then we need to have the expertise to test the hypothesis, right? So this is very important. And when we talk about this, verification, it really refers to your ability, whether you are capable of doing this. So now let's ask, when we know there are methods available for us to test the hypothesis, and you don't know, will you just simply say, oh, I quit? No, you don't quit. You should say, I go to review literature, right? Because you can educate yourself. And when the techniques are not available for you, you don't know how to do statistical analysis. However, this specific hypothesis needs your skill for statistical analysis. What will you say? You should say, okay, no problem, I will review the literature by myself. I can educate myself. You should not say, I quit. You cannot quit everything, right? Because in research, when you say that you are conducting a research, you are experiencing a lot of issues you don't know. You will be experiencing a lot of issues you have no ideas at all. So your standard answer for to encounter those difficulties is that, no problem, I will review the literature to educate myself. Okay? It's very important to have this kind of mindset, or otherwise it will be very difficult to overcome your graduation paper. You need to study a lot. That's the life. That's the life of doing research. And this is also our purpose of training you to conduct an independent study on this. Why? Because once you finish this, once you go through this process and succeed, you will feel happy, achieved, and more confident. Indeed, because you can do all of this. You know how to deal with the difficulties. Okay? And there's another issue, that is, hypothesis should be related to existing body of knowledge. Why? Because we need to provide a reasonable explanation, right? When we say that's a reasonable, it should be related to the knowledge you have. For example, if I see, oh, right, look at that, the student over there is taking a nap right now. This is a phenomenon. So I should give it, this phenomenon already happened with a tentative, reasonable explanation, right? So this reasonable explanation is that, well, maybe she stood up too late last night, right? So she went to bed just around 3 a.m. and woke up at 8 and rushed into the classroom. Oh, no wonder. Look here. My explanation is reasonable. And I'll give you another one that is not based on the existing body of knowledge. So henceforth, my explanation is not reasonable. I look at the student there taking a nap in front of me. Oh, I see. An alien driving a UFO arrived at her home and talked with her all day, all night. So she was exhausted. That is how she took a nap. She is taking a nap right now. Look here. My explanation is not reasonable. Why? Of course, this is an explanation. This is some kind of explanation, right? But it is not reasonable. It is not reasonable. Why it is not reasonable? Because it is not based on the existing body of knowledge. When I said, well, if I provide this explanation to you, what would you think? Are you crazy? Are you nuts or something? Right? Very simple. So remember, it has to be within the existing body of knowledge. And the other one is, should be operationalizable. Look at here. This one, a little bit difficult to test, right? And this one is a little bit easier to operationalize, right? So look here. If we want to test the hypothesis, although it is a lot more difficult to test, it does not mean it cannot be tested. It says we have difficulties to test it. which means that this one, social cohesion, is operationalizable, can be operationalized from concept to variables. So we can go to collect data. Okay? It's very important because we need to test hypotheses. If a hypothesis cannot, the variables or the concepts inside one hypothesis cannot be operationalized, then we have no way to collect data. Is that right? It's very important to keep in mind for this one. Okay, I'll give you another 3 minutes to look at this very simple slide.
I already have questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Right, so I have 3 questions that I feel like you already answered one of them. Number 1, for the hypotheses, can we use phi W1H to answer the questions?
Is what?
Phi W1H.
But,
it's thinking when you said why, where, who, why, and
okay, basically we describe the relationship between 2 variable concepts. So if we provide why, when, what, it most likely are research questions. For example, why you ask me this question? Then I have to provide the reasons, right? So I'm not testing, I'm exploring your reasons. So this is a qualitative research. So that's why when we write our research questions, mostly they are applied for qualitative research. Remember, the nature of qualitative research is to describe the variable or the concept, right? Okay? And quantitative research is to identify the numbers, compare the numbers. So a lot of time we test the meaning, the significance of the numbers.
Can research be included both methods, like qualitative?
You're right for that, yes. When I say qualitative research and quantitative research, it's a very, very simple typology. But a lot of research are mixed. A lot of research are mixed designed. So it's sometimes you need, for example, if you want to investigate with our students' ideas about environmental protection, right? You can do both. One, you can do survey. However, survey can provide you a broad range of understanding about various issues, but there will be no depth. So you can do in the meantime with interview. So interview is qualitative. Survey, the data you collect, you need to use statistical package to analyze those numbers, right? So you are conducting quantitative research and qualitative research. It's mixed together, of course.
And can a research be only one hypothesis, or there will be many hypotheses?
Okay, basically, look here. The idea is that normally we should have several hypotheses, not only one. We have a research problem, and one research has only one research problem. That's a very huge direction for us. Based on the research problem, we can lay out our research purpose, right? So remember, one research has only one research purpose. You can only do one thing at one time. I often see that some students writing out their research purpose in the study. I would like to explore A, and also I try to help out B, and then if possible I will do C. You have A, B, C. Wow, that's incredible because you have 3 studies, right? Remember, you could have only A, one thing. Only one, because when we talk about study issue and study population, you only focus on one study. You are not conducting 3 studies. But look here, when we have a research problem, say that I'm trying to explore the meaning of A or explore A, right? But A is too broad. Can I try to use indicators to dissect the A's into 3 minus A, right? A plus, A1, A2, and A3. So I can explore A1, A2, A3. So altogether, I could have 3 research questions or 3 research hypotheses. Why do we need to have some hypotheses or some research questions? Just as previous slides indicate, it can help us to clarify our efforts of data collection. Is that I can narrow down the focus instead of a very big one. Okay? So the answer for how many research hypotheses we can have? Several, not only one. If you have only one, that would be very strange, right? Because your research problem is there and you only use only one, unless your research is very, very small. It's kind of class activity that we find. But we are talking about graduation paper, right? So it should be a little bit bigger. Any?
Questions. The other one, you were mentioning the hypotheses. We have to be really careful because we have to collect hypotheses or research questions. Is there any difference between a hypothesis and a research question?
No, only that. Research questions and research hypotheses. Of course, you can lay out one research question to a research hypothesis in the meantime, of course. Okay, but there is nothing in between, just two forms of the, you can treat them as a stepstone for you to start data collection. They are required. Okay, they are required.
My last question is, just to clarify, so basically the hypothesis, it actually is just to turn it into a variable. Is it a data? Or is it just to answer something that we already have in mind that is like this?
Okay, you have to look at that. Should be operationalizable. That is, it doesn't matter basically when we say hypothesis, it describes the relationship between 2 concepts or 2 variables, right? If that is 2 variables, it will be very easy because we don't need to operationalize the variable. Because when we say variable, already capable of being measured, right? But if they are concepts, just like this one, this is a concept, suicide rates concepts, right? And social cohesion concept, right? So these 2 need to be operationalizable. So we can operationalize the concept into variables. So under this hypothesis, we could have several sub-hypotheses for us to test based on the indicators of each of the concept here. But let's look here. The average age of the male students, is this a variable? Yes. It's higher than that of the female students, variable. So we do not need to operationalize it, right? So because they are capable of measurement already, so we just go to collect your data, your height, then that is the end of the story. But for this one, it's much more difficult because we need to operationalize suicide rates. We need to operationalize social cohesion. A little bit more difficult, but still doable. Is that right? Any more questions? If not, back to you. Read by yourself, 3 minutes. Okay, let's move down to the next slide. Okay, we have 3 minutes left. It's a good time to introduce the different types of hypotheses. Basically, we have two kinds of hypotheses. The first one is we call research hypothesis. Research hypothesis, we have the notion for this one is H1. H1 refers to the hypothesis we really want to understand, we want to test. But in scientific circle, we use alternate hypothesis. And we have an H0. This is a convention in our scientific circle. Basically, for example, the average student, the average age of male students in this classroom is older than that of the female student in the classroom, right? So basically, this is older. This is a research hypothesis we have. And the alternate hypothesis is very simple. It's the opposite side. So this H1 plus H0, these two hypotheses will form all possibilities of the comparison between the two average ages, all the possible. So basically, if this is 1, right, all the other sides is H0, we call null hypothesis, or sometimes we call alternate hypothesis, 替代假设，研究假设，替代假设。And alternate hypothesis is very important. Why? Because this is the target for us to test hypothesis. Actually, when we collect data to test our hypothesis, we do not directly test research hypothesis. Instead, we test alternate hypothesis. Why? Later I will tell you. We invent this in our scientific circles. It explicitly specifies the relationship that will be considered as true in case the research hypothesis proved to be wrong. So remember this, let's take a look. If we know we combine these two hypotheses together, we'll make all the possible happenings for the scenario there, right? So look here, if H1 we quite sure it is wrong, then this should be true. Is that right? If this is true, then this should be wrong. So either way, we cannot have all. Okay, you can choose only one. If you choose this one, then you have to reject this one. If you choose this one, you have to reject this one. Very simple. Is that right? So basically, in our scientific circle, we use H0 as the target for test. So we can say this is the opposite of the research hypothesis. Sometimes in statistical analysis, we have a null hypothesis. We use null hypothesis. It's formulated as hypothesis of no difference. It's formulated as an alternate hypothesis. So basically for now, it's very simple for you to understand one point. The relationship between H1 and H0 is that they form together. They together form the all possible happenings of the situation here related to the hypothesis. Either yes or no, right? So if we take this, we have to reject this. Is that right? If we reject this, then we have no choice but to accept this. Very simple, either or relationship. Okay, so far, are you with me? Okay, you may feel a little bit confused, but it's okay. Later I will explain more to you. Let's take a 10 minutes break. So basically, this is a scientific invention. It would be very helpful for us to do hypothesis testing. So in general, for example, this is a research hypothesis. Daniel is a teacher. You want to test this hypothesis, right? And the other way is Daniel is not a teacher. So you can see all the possibility for Daniel's identity can be described by either H1 or H0, right? H1 or H0. So both of them combined together is the all possibility that we can have for Daniel. So Daniel is a teacher or not a teacher. So this is the logical wholeness out there. Okay, get the idea. So look here. If we accept, if we reject Daniel is not a teacher, then we must accept Daniel is a teacher, right? In terms of Daniel and the relationship between Daniel and teacher. If we reject Daniel is a teacher, then we have to accept this hypothesis. Daniel is not a teacher. So it's either way. So this is the way we lay out our research, scientific research. Okay, and there are some examples for this one. There will be no difference in the level of infant mortality among the different treatment modalities. Wow, this is kind of intriguing, right? So let's look here. There will be no difference. Basically, there are two things. No difference in the level of infant mortality, first one, among the different treatment modalities, different models of treatment. So suppose we have 4 different modalities, 1, 2, 3, and 4. The 4 different kinds, there are no differences in their ability, the infant of the level of infant modality. So look here, this is hypothesis. We call this as H1, research hypothesis. So anyone here can tell me what is the alternate hypothesis for this one? The alternate hypothesis for this one?
There will be difference.
Thank you very much. There will be difference in the level of infant mortality among the different treatment modality. Very simple, right? So you just take away no, then difference. So you can combine no and yes, then there will complete wholeness of there. Very simple. Let's take this one. Hold on. There's a negative relationship between the number, let's see this one, the number of stray dogs and the city happiness index in the Kaohsiung city. Okay, we have a relation between two things, right? So we have a negative relationship. So what is the alternate hypothesis for this one? Huh?
Positive.
Wrong.
The number.
Number? No, there's nothing related to the number. We are talking about the relationship, right? It describes here is a negative relationship. So this is the research hypothesis. So what is the alternate hypothesis for this research hypothesis?
It's not positive relationship.
Not positive. Anyone else? Come on, students. Students. What is the opposite side of the research hypothesis?
No relationship.
Ziming, want to say something? Thinking? Okay. How about debunked? Any idea? Come on, it's so straightforward, no mystery here. Don't be so complicated. The opposite side of the research hypothesis is there is not a negative relationship. Why? Why it is not a there's a positive? Because negative relationship, positive relationship, and this is an equal relationship, right? Remember, we have a negative, we have a relation that negative, we have a positive. However, if there's a equal relationship, right? So when we describe negative, the other side is equal and positive. So there is not a negative relationship. So we simply put here. Okay? And this one, I will not give you the answers for today, because this will be your home assignment for you to have some fun. Try to find out the alternate hypothesis for this one. A total of 60% of females and 30% of males in the study populations are smokers. This is the research hypothesis. I want you to go home. If you like, you can talk to your friends. Damn it, what does Daniel mean for this? What is the alternate hypothesis for this one? Tell me. You can just, because I'm going to put this in one of the test questions for next week. What is the alternate hypothesis for this one?
Not smokers.
Huh?
Not smokers.
Not so easy. Not so easy. This one is more difficult for you than your imagination. So try your best. Try your best, okay? Okay. I will just jump to the next slide. So remember, I will give you a test about this one in next quiz. I told you the question, right? The alternate hypothesis for this one. So try to find out by yourself. Okay, let's talk about logic of testing hypothesis. Overall, hypothesis helps us to collect data to test it, right? So let's talk about the logic of testing hypothesis. This is the 9 here. Our purpose for testing hypothesis is not to prove the hypothesis. Remember, we don't prove the hypothesis. Why we don't prove the hypothesis is right or is true? Because in theory, you cannot prove Daniel is a teacher as completely true. What do I say this? In theory, you cannot prove one thing is completely true. Because even you have a lot of tests on Daniel as a teacher, right? However, there are still some other infinite possibility that you need to test to prove every time when you have a test about Daniel as a teacher, you have to continuously test it. Even though you have finished on infinite times of test, still there are some other infinite time of the testing waiting for you to do. So it's impossible for you to have a test to prove something is true. Okay? So, however, remember, we cannot prove something is true. But there is a cue here. Instead, with data collection and analysis, we do one time of data collection, we do one time of data analysis. We cannot prove it is true, but we can aim to falsify the hypothesis. Which means that if something stands there, we can prove that it is wrong for one time, simply one time, then it cannot be true. One time, to falsify only one time, then we can say this is wrong, right? Then we cannot accept it. Very simple. Okay, so in practice, you do not try to prove Daniel is a teacher. Instead, in practice, you try to falsify Daniel is not a teacher. That's it. This is something we try to target. Daniel is not a teacher. And Daniel is not a teacher here is the alternate hypothesis, 替代假设 to the research hypothesis, right? So remember, in our research, basically we aim to falsify the alternative hypothesis, but not the research hypothesis. Okay, not the research hypothesis. If all means taken, we have tried our best, cannot falsify the hypothesis. If we, with our efforts to test the hypothesis, we collect data, and we cannot falsify the hypothesis, then what we should do? we have no choice but to support the hypothesis. Very simple. Let's look here. Our purpose here, we have a research hypothesis here. Daniel is a teacher, right? And then remember, we do not prove Daniel is a teacher. We try to falsify Daniel is not a teacher. Daniel is not a teacher. So we collect data. So for example, President Margaret Chan, 我们的校长, she tried to falsify. She tried to identify whether Daniel is a teacher or not. So basically, she is trying to attack the alternate hypothesis. Daniel is not a teacher. So she tried to collect data. The first try, one day she suddenly rushed into the classroom, tried to collect data to see Daniel is not a teacher. And she collected data, find out what I'm teaching here. Okay, her data showed that she could not accept the alternate hypothesis, right? Because Daniel is not a teacher. What she ever sees that is I'm a teacher here teaching. So she has to reject, remember, she has to reject this hypothesis, right? And let's ask us one question. Since the president rejects this one, then what will be her choice? Her only choice is to accept, right? Accept Daniel is a teacher now for one time. She doesn't believe that Daniel is really the teacher. So she continued to give another try. She rushed into the department, asked the department director, is Daniel a teacher? So she tried to falsify this again, right? Attack the alternate hypothesis again. And the director chairperson, Professor Mark Lai, say that, yeah, I remember, yeah, indeed, Daniel is teaching. Okay, she collected another set of data. She cannot falsify. She cannot accept this null hypothesis. So she has to reject the hypothesis. So now she has to accept this one, right? So remember, our efforts of data collection is focusing on our determination whether to accept or reject alternate hypothesis, not the research hypothesis. It seems that research hypothesis, whether we reject or accept, is the side effect, side benefits of our effort. That's it. Okay, so basically, let's look here. After our data collection, we have only two possibilities. One is to look at non-alternate hypothesis. It's not falsified. We cannot falsify it. So we cannot reject it. Then you have no choice but to support H0, right? So remember, if one day the president comes into the classroom and see that it is YMC teaching this class, not me, right? So look here. H0 is about Daniel is not a teacher. With the same set of data, she could not falsify the null hypothesis. So what is her decision? She has no choice but to accept Daniel is not a teacher, right? Since Daniel is not a teacher, then what would be her choice to deal with research hypothesis? She has to accept this, right? Look here. She has to accept this, then she has to reject this. So say that Daniel is a teacher is rejected. It's rejected. There's another possibility. If alternate hypothesis is falsified, that is, if it is rejected, then what will be your decision? You have no choice but to support this one. And remember our wording here. Do we say that H1 is true? We don't say that. Why? Because with one time or tryout, we have no way to say it is completely true. We just accept it for now. Remember. So the wording, the way for you to describe the hypothesis testing is always just like this. Because I cannot reject the alternate hypothesis. I cannot reject, so I have no choice but to accept the null hypothesis. Because I have to reject the null hypothesis, so I have no way but to accept the research hypothesis, H1. It's either way. So the first consideration is all about whether you want to reject the null hypothesis or not. If you reject, then you accept all the research hypothesis. Which means that if you reject H0, then you have to accept H1, right? If you accept H0, then you have to reject H1. Look here. The result is about whether you want to reject or accept H1, right, or research hypothesis. But look here, all the efforts we have conducted is about whether we need to reject or accept H0. It's not about our research hypothesis. It's very straightforward, right? So this is we call the process of falsification. 否证. We use falsification to advance our scientific discovery, not trying to prove something is true. We try to find faults about something, try to identify whether it is wrong. Okay? So this is the logic for testing hypotheses. Okay, 5 minutes for you to solve this.
So if we have 3 hypotheses in our research paper, that means we will have another 3 of alternative hypotheses.
Yes.
So in the end, we will state out 6.
No. Basically, you just lay out the research hypothesis. But your efforts are aiming at the null hypothesis. So in statistical analysis, we always try to find out the significant difference between 2 variables. This is a form of null hypothesis. And if there is no significant difference, then we say that they are equal. Then that is very simple. So you do not need to state 6 hypotheses. You need only to have 3. Because these are the 3 research hypotheses here, right? Okay? 5 minutes for you to read over this. Try to understand. You can draw a little bit, then you understand. Basically, H1, the relationship between H1 and H0 is a combined 1 for the logical wholeness. If you accept H0, then you have to reject H1. If you accept H0, then you have to reject H1. Very simple, right? But remember, when you say reject or accept, you do not agree to whether it is true or not. You just have no choice but to accept or reject. It's very important to keep in mind that. Okay? So never indicate in your research paper saying that, oh, something is true. No, nothing is true. You have only conduct 1 time of data collection, 1 time of data analysis, right? You have no qualification. You are not qualified to say, oh, this is completely true. No. It's just based on these times of data analysis. I cannot reject it. Okay? You cannot reject it, then you have to accept it. You accept its validity for now. That is the meaning of the hypothesis, right? When we say hypothesis, it is a tentative, reasonable explanations. Reasonable because the explanation is based on literature. Tentative because we need to have a lot of tests to try. Unfortunately for all of us, whenever we conduct a study, we can only collect data 1 time, right? It will take about months or years, only 1 time. So we can only use 1 time of data collection analysis to falsify. Try to decide whether we need to reject or accept null hypothesis, so that in return we can determine to reject or accept research hypothesis. That's it. Very simple. Okay? Okay, read for yourself. Come on, think about that. The key idea here is that you have always keep in mind, we have no ways to prove something is true. But it will be very easy for us to say something is wrong, right? And this kind of characteristics in our daily life can help us, because in reality, whenever we conduct research, we only have one time of effort to collect data, right? We are not computers. We cannot just run infinite cycles to collect data, right? So imagine this. For yourself, when you claim you want to conduct your graduation paper, you use a whole summer of time to collect data, right? You try very hard, 3 months. That's still one time of data. So, since logically we cannot use data without data analysis to prove something is right, so we never try to do that. Never try. Instead, we try to falsify, try to find the fault. It will be much easier to find fault, right? So if one time or try out, we cannot find anything wrong from this hypothesis. Since we cannot find anything wrong, oh, come on, okay, fine, I accept you for this time. And since I accept you, then I have to reject the other side, right? And if one time or try out, I find out, oh, you are really wrong in some fault out there. So I want to reject you. So if I reject you, reject null hypothesis, then well, I have no choice. So look at the other research hypothesis there. I accept that. Very simple. This is the so-called hypothesis testing hypothesis. So basically, remember, we are so limited. We do not have the luxury, ability, or resources to conduct infinite time or data collection. So we have no way to prove something is true. But it will be very easy for us to say something is wrong, right? So we use this kind of characteristic to advance our scientific study. Remember, if a hypothesis is found rejected by one research, then the hypothesis needs to revise a little bit, right? So we increase our understanding about the phenomenon already happened or bound to happen, because our tentative reasonable explanation will be more close to the reality. Because we have tried out and find out we need to revise it. So we revise a little bit, right? Okay.
You mentioned that we always want to review the hypothesis number one, the research hypothesis. However, it's really easy to fall on alternative hypotheses, because once you collect the data and then you prove wrong, you're gonna be like going against the facts.
Basically, when we do qualitative research, we do not have a hypothesis. So you don't have to worry about this. In qualitative research, we do not lay out research hypotheses. It's only research questions. Because qualitative research aims to identify reasons, describe the phenomena, right? And try to identify what they are. So basically, in qualitative research, we use research questions, but not research hypotheses. But for quantitative research, most likely we will use research hypotheses. Although you could also use research hypotheses, research questions for quantitative research. It's okay. It's okay. So remember, not all study require research hypothesis. No, it's not. It's not. Okay. So don't worry about that. Okay, let's go on. We have to make our decision to accept or reject, right? Whenever we make a decision, we may commit some error for our decision. For example, Daniel is a teacher, Daniel is not a teacher, null hypothesis. The null hypothesis here, Daniel is not here. So look here, whatever the result is, I need to make a decision. Is that right? So basically there are only four phenomena, four possibilities out there. That is, when a null hypothesis is actually true or false. And this is my decision, your decision. If your decision is to accept the null hypothesis, and the null hypothesis is actually true, then there's nothing wrong, right? You accept the null hypothesis. The other one, when the null hypothesis is actually wrong, and your decision is to reject it, there's nothing wrong. Fine, because eventually you have to make your decision, decide to reject or accept, right? So in these two scenarios, there's something, it's a perfect okay, it's all right. And there are two possibilities out there. We call type 1 error or type 2 error. Type 1 error indicates if a null hypothesis is actually true, however you falsely rejected it, you reject it wrongly, then you commit type 1 error. On the other side, if the null hypothesis is actually false, it's wrong, however you falsely accept it, you have committed type 2 error. Type 1 error and type 2 errors are very important. Why? Because they describe the possibility of our possible error of judgment. And also, they often appear in scholarly papers. They do not give you explanation. They just say, oh, the type 1 error still exists up there. You have to understand what does type 1 error. Simply put, if you falsely reject a true null hypothesis, that is type 1 error. If you falsely accept a true wrong hypothesis, you commit type 2 error. That's it. Very simple. Okay. Sometimes you will read a term we call type 3 error. Type 3 error does not refer to your decision. There are many different kind of definition for type 3 error. One possibility is it refers to you are using the wrong ways to deal with the wrong questions. It's a type 3 errors. It's a wrong way to deal with the wrong answers. That is a type 3 error. There are many ways to describe type 3. But basically, in terms of our decision to reject or accept a null hypothesis, there are two kinds of errors here, type 1 and type 2. And you have to remember that, okay? And let's continue. So error, why do you have the possibility to commit errors in hypothesis testing? Well, there are a lot of issues here. For example, you may, just because of the study design is not correct. And maybe the sampling procedure is not correct. We will talk about this in the later lectures. And maybe the ways of your data collection is not accurate. Maybe your analysis is wrong. Or maybe the statistical procedures you have taken are inappropriate. For example, we have 4 different levels of measurement for the variables, right? You need to calculate. Then there are some limitations for you. You have to make sure assumption. For example, the variance should be equal. Variance refers to the distribution of the data should be equal. There are some other considerations out there. So you have to fit those assumptions to conduct statistical analysis. Maybe you just have wrong conclusions. So remember this, when we test the hypothesis, we have to be very careful on every step of the testing. Eventually, when we make up our decision, and always keep in mind, our decision is not final. Why? Because we may very likely to commit error, right? There are 2 possibilities of errors out there. One is when the null hypothesis is actually true, you reject it. You commit type 1 error. When the null hypothesis is really wrong, false, but you decide to accept it, you commit type 2 error. So which means that it doesn't matter when you make what kind of decision you make, accept or reject, there is always a possibility for you to commit some kind of errors out there. So our decision for every data analysis is not final. It's not final. Be careful for this. Okay, and how about research questions? We have talked about research hypotheses, right? How about research questions? Well, basically, these two are on the same level of research process. After we lay out our research purpose, we will follow it with research questions or research hypotheses. So the status of these two sets of research hypothesis and research question are basically equal. So it means that you do not need research hypothesis sometimes. When you conduct qualitative research, you don't need research hypothesis. Or if you are conducting quantitative research, most likely you will use research hypothesis, most likely. But sometimes you will still use research question. It's okay. But the most important part is that the major component of the research questions or research hypotheses are from the indicators you have identified. Indicators, okay? So basically, when the variable is very limited to an extent that the research can only operationalize the concept itself. That is, you describe the concept. Research question is good. That is the very nature of the qualitative research, right? Or when research is for describing, qualitative research. Or understanding individual variable, qualitative research. But not related to the relationship between variables. Well, that's good enough. For example, what is the trend of Taiwan agriculture export in the past 10 years? Look here. Do I need a research hypothesis for this one? No, I just described the trend. Right? The research question is good enough. This is the research questions. Okay? So a very simple rule of thumb is that we use research questions for qualitative research. And we can also use research questions for quantitative research sometimes. And for quantitative research, we can also use research hypotheses. It's okay. But for qualitative research, very, very seldom we will use research hypotheses because we have no way to test a hypothesis. Okay?
But for research questions, do we also need to state the opposite?
No, you don't. You just state the research questions. For example, the impact of alcoholism on the family, right? We could have 3 research questions. 1, what is the impact of alcoholism on a family's marital status? Number 1, right? Number 2, what is the impact of alcoholism on family's finance? Number 2. Number 3, what is the impact of alcoholism on children's way of life? Number 3. That's it. Do you see that rationale? They are just research questions. Very simple, right? And it corresponds to the way we describe research hypotheses. We can say that the more consumption of alcoholic, the less amicable of their marital status, right? We can say that. So this is a research hypothesis. But basically, the major components of the 3 research questions, all the 3 research hypotheses are all the same. It's about marital status. It's about money, finance, right? It's about children's ways of life. That's it. Just the different ways of describing it. Okay? Any question? Okay, so next time we are going to go over for lesson 6, and you have to prepare number 5, quiz number 5. And we have a research portfolio 4 for you to write. Look here. Following your research problems, you need to fine-tune your research problem, okay? Everyone's research, you have identified a general direction, broad area, try to dissect it, select the topic that interests you, lay out the questions, identify the objective, and so on, following the problem identification. So I want you to write out your hypothesis or your research questions. So what is the relationship between this and this? Well, basically, this refers to the concept of your study issue. This one refers to the concept of your study issue. And how about this two? Refers to the indicators. Indicators of the concept of your study issue. Okay? The impact of alcoholism on family is the study issue. And we have three indicators: marital status, right? Or family finance, and children's way of life. So these are the three indicators. So in this regard, you should have three research questions or three research hypotheses. Is that right? Very simple. So you have to correspond with these two sets. That's why we need to learn operationalization. 操作定型化 is very important, right? Concept, indicators. Indicators become the backbone, the cornerstone for us to create our research questions and our research hypotheses. So they are related. Okay? So once you are able to lay out your research problems, you have to read, you have to review literature, trying to understand what kind of indicators can reflect the concept of the study issue listed in your research problem, and then dissect it and create your research questions. Any question? I will be looking forward to read your portfolio number 4 to see how we do on this one. Okay, if not, we'll call it a day for today. Thank you. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a polite way to do so. Okay, thank you very much.